Hi, thanks so much for choosing to attend this talk this morning. There are three great speakers happening at the same time. And yes, I'm going to go self-confidently and say I'm a great speaker. If I'm not, at least I'm funny and you get to hear violin. So hey, this will work out somehow in the end. So I'm Jess Ingrasselino. I am currently the Director of Quality Engineering for the Education and Nonprofit Clouds of Salesforce.org. I have a team of 18 people currently, and it will be 20 people by the end of August, 27 people by the end of the year. And when I started at Salesforce, I started as a senior tester, and I was the second person on the team. So I've been really privileged to be trusted with growing the team and growing our testing practice to include a lot of the things that we've heard from Charity this morning, as well as other practices that we know to be really excellent, and to bring those into an enterprise environment. It's been a great challenge, and I've loved every minute of it, honestly. So how did I get here? What's the path? So like Charity, I actually majored in music. I got my doctorate in music education, and I finished that in 2015, while at the same time starting my career as a software tester. I teach Python, I teach software testing, I teach music lessons to children and adults. I am a writer, so I write blogs. I've written a book about Python programming, but it was not quality tested, so just, know that there are some errors in there that I would love to correct. But it's Python 2.7 anyways, so it's hardly relevant anymore, which is good for me, okay? I'm a creative human. I am a musician, a violinist, a violist in several orchestras, and I love reading, I love sewing, altering clothing more than making it from scratch, just to be clear. I've studied writing, creative writing at the Writers Studio in New York, so I love learning. And that begs the question, why did I choose the word love affair in this talk? Actually, that was a very intentional choice. So some people love other people in their lives, and 2 divorces later, I can tell you it's clearly not me. But what I do love is teaching. I love teaching, I love learning. I love writing code. I'm not great, but I'm not awful. I was an SDET in a couple of places before I got to be at Salesforce. And I wrote systems that worked and worked well, and I really enjoyed that work. I love writing. I love communicating with people. I love talking. All of these modes of communication make me really happy because other people have whole stories and whole histories that we get to interact with and explore, not only as testers through software, but from my position as a manager, I'm constantly looking at this circle when I bring somebody new onto my team. Music. You'll figure that out later. Art, making art, creating art, doing research. So back in 2015, I gave my very first ever talk. It was at CAST, and the talk was the art and science of questioning. And I was really terrified to give this talk, which you will visualize if you go look it up, because yes, it is on YouTube. Don't do it, but if you did, you would see Terrified Jessica. But Terrified Jessica is talking about something that less terrified Jessica still thinks is important, which is the application of research and qualitative research, specifically in questioning principles, to software. And that seems to be sort of diametrically opposed. Why would you do qualitative research on something like software that seems that it has fixed behaviors? But actually, if you take a look at things in computer science, like the halting problem, if you think about AI and the sociological sort of applications of AI, including things like bias that can be built into AI simply by who chooses the data sets, then you start to realize that research isn't actually such a bizarre thing to bring into testing. It's actually pretty important, at least the skill set, right? You could call it whatever you want, but that skill set is important to bring in. Technology, if I didn't love it, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be working in this field. And philosophy. Why is it that we do what we do? Why is it that we choose what we choose to test? What's important about this? In my director role in particular, I really have to think about that because I'm acting as a facilitator and a guide for 18 people who are testing individual products that are going out the door every 2 weeks. And I need to have those conversations. So for me, when I got into testing, this changed my life, because every single thing I cared about, every single thing I loved, every single thing that made me feel excited was happening at the same time with software testing. And I was just like, what? So, and then getting to be a director, it's like I got to put my teacher hat back on also. And I got to interact with people, and I got to, yes, there's a lot of responsibility, but there's also such a great joy in hiring somebody who has a great skill set but is never formally tested. But they don't know that they have been testing for 20 years. They don't know, oh, you actually possess all the skills, because something that we don't do as well as we could is naming the skills in a way that allows us to connect to other skill sets. This is definitely something I've noticed in the industry. We have our words, and we have our canon, and we're not so great at saying, okay, you know what? This is the words and this is the canon, but let's abstract up. Let's talk behaviors. Let's talk about what that looks like on a more abstract scale. And I have a phenomenal tester on my team, and she's a yoga teacher, and she came with all of the skills. When I interviewed her, I was just like, and she'd been using a similar product in some parts of our product, and I was like, I have to have her on my team. She has to be on my team, because she's never done testing with a capital T, but she's been testing for 20 years. She comes with this skill set. She comes with the care, with the concern, with the research, with the flexible thinking and all of these things. So you can tell I'm passionate about this. And this is why I chose the title of Love Affair, because for me, this is my passion. This is where everything gets to meet. And the more I'm in it, the more I learn, oh my gosh, I am literally doing, you could stop paying me, just let me eat and have a place to live and some health insurance. But beyond that, you could stop paying me and I would continue to do what I do every single day. That's love. So what I want to talk with you about today are these 4 learning theories that, there are hundreds of learning theories. You can dive in. There are people who are just specialists in learning theories. And I am not a specialist in learning theories, but I did spend 15 years educating in education, learning about various learning theories. And I spent 10 years as a classroom teacher. And my dissertation uses some of these areas. So I feel qualified enough to give you an introduction and talk through how they can be useful, at least. So today we'll be talking about the zone of proximal development, scaffolding, metacognition, and flow. Now, I am going to talk through each of these theories. Then I am going to take a piece of the Mozart Fourth Violin Concerto, which Anne-Marie Charrette is going to be selecting for me. And I've never played it, and I will be learning it in front of you, and I'll be talking through as I'm learning it so you can see the application of learning theories, okay? And we'll talk about why I've chosen this methodology once we talk about the learning theories. So the first learning theory is the zone of proximal development. So Lev Vygotsky sort of championed this theory toward the end of his life. He's a Russian sociologist, philosopher, and psychologist. And the essential idea is that there are sort of 3 areas that a learner can inhabit. There's the area where you know how to do the thing that you're doing. You don't need help. You can do it on autopilot. So brushing your teeth, for some of you, it's, I can log into my system, I can run my regression, my God, I'm so bored, right? This is why we have automation, because regression is in that area, right? Then we have the sort of zone where something is so difficult that you can't do it. You can look at it, you can think about it, but it is not doable without getting extensive help. So that area can be a source of frustration. Unless you have very high frustration tolerance, that will be a very difficult thing for you to do. So an example of that might be hi, I've noticed that you've never written code before, but we need somebody to write some regression automation for the UI. Here you go. Really though? But it's a thing that happens, and it's a high level of frustration. Now, the center circle is sort of like it's like the center of a Tootsie Pop. It's the best, it's the juicy core. This is where you have just enough challenge that you feel motivated to move forward, but it's not so challenging that you feel like quitting. And so that center part is called the zone of proximal development. So ZPD equals Tootsie Pop, all right? All right, so scaffolding. Scaffolding is essentially the way that we interact with our world, and there are sort of 3 modes of interaction that teachers consider when they look at their classrooms. Self-to-self, self-to-text, and self-to-world. So the self-to-self interaction is the interaction where you will ask yourself, oh, can I relate this to any of my own personal experiences? So today, for example, as I'm playing the Mozart 4th violin concerto, I'm doing that self-to-self because I've played the 5th concerto before and I've played the 3rd concerto before. I've played a whole bunch of Mozart symphonies and chamber music, so learning Mozart is easier for me because I have that scaffolding. So I can pick that up a little more quickly than, say, picking up the Bruch violin concerto, which I haven't played a lot of Bruchs. So that would be more challenging due to a lot of sort of internal factors. Then there's the self-to-text. And so I'm going to ask you to consider the word text in this circumstance in the sort of postmodern sensibility of it. So I don't just mean a book, okay? Text could be a piece of artwork. It could be a piece of music. It could be an event. It could be a log, as what Charity was talking about. Interactions with texts that you've actually had. Those can inform what you do. So for me, I've interacted with the musical texts, recordings of Mozart. And then there's self-to-world. So how are you connecting with performances in the broader world at large, events in the broader world, attending a conference, self-to-world, encountering other people and having conversations, challenging your own perspective, self-to-world connections, broadening, pushing out on those boundaries. All 3 of those things, so this, I feel, is a self-to-world moment. So I'm taking this Mozart 4, self-to-text, and I'm using self-to-self in order to bring you, self-to-world, the Mozart situation. We good so far? All right. Metacognition. This is the thing you're going to watch me do. It's messy. We are often unaware that we are doing the thing that we're doing. And my hope with this is to help you ask yourself the questions, do I think about my thinking intentionally? And can I course correct and learn in the moment? So jazz musicians, especially jazz improv musicians, do this a lot. It's pretty much their whole job because they have a framework, which is that chord sheet, and it's like an outline. For those of you who are not musical, it is like an outline. And that outline says, okay, of all the notes in the world, these are the ones you get. It's a little like a library in a coding language. You get these methods, enjoy. Everything else, you can try, but that's at your own risk. So, you've got this sort of library or this outline, and then within that, there's all this room for play. There's all this room for the jazz musician to say, what can I do that's interesting? What did I do that worked? What did I do that failed spectacularly? And what did I learn? And how am I going to use that information next time? That's metacognition. And there are different ways that we can apply that, not only to our testing in terms of, hey, I'm sitting in front of the software, the hardware, whatever it is that you might be working with, but you can also apply it to teams. Okay, how are you approaching this problem? So-and-so. Jessica, how are you approaching this problem? Well, what were you thinking about? Well, what do you think the customer is going to think? Have you thought about how this particular customer might interact with this? What are the risk areas? This is all in that metacognitive space and is informed by the scaffolding of that individual, of knowing what do they know about the customer, what do they know about themselves and their experiences with the product, what do they know about the development teams. So all of these things fit into a variety of aspects of actually doing this job. And then finally, flow. When am I at my happiest? When am I so invested that 4 hours has gone by, and yeah, I'm working, but I don't realize what time it is until somebody comes over to tap me on the shoulder and like, hey, we're gonna go out for drinks at the pub, you wanna come? And you're like, it's pub time already? Like, I just ate lunch. What's going on? You know, for me, it's really the enjoyment of like, I will get into that in a practice moment where I'm struggling and kind of working, but then at the end, oh my gosh, like I can play this thing, and that's satisfying to me. So there's that satisfaction, that moment of, I forgot time. And flow is introduced by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Does not sound the way it's spelled, but my blog post about this talk is now up on the Salesforce engineering blog, so you can go ahead and look that up and get the references and figure things out there. But the flow element has been studied, and the study of that has shown that people just forget. And it's not about forgetting, it's about being so inside of that ZPD space that you lose time. So that's pretty cool. But what's next? Okay, so how does this work? Learning theories applied. So, you know, as I was thinking about how to communicate this knowledge that I have, I felt that actually playing the violin would be one of the better ways I could do it, because A, I can self-select what I know that I can learn within a structured period of time, but B, you can hear it. You know, it's one thing to say, oh, trust me, it'll get better. But it's better or easier for me to show you and let you hear, oh wait, she's not making this up. It can get better. You can apply it. And a lot of people have sort of asked me throughout my career, how did you get from music to software testing? And you know, what I say is, oh, well, I spent 10 years of my life locking myself in a padded room with this, going step by step until I learned to play it. And then I had to perform it in public, memorized. So I'm good. Like this, software testing is very similar. You sit, you stare, you work, and then you're like, okay, this is what I found, these are the issues, these are the problems, these are the questions, and what's your public performance? Production. So it's not substantially different. People perceive it as different, but abstract up a layer, it's not. So how it works, Anne-Marie is going to select the measures of music. So right now, if she has not already, she's going to choose 2 lines of music. I'm going to learn the music in real time. I assure you this is terrifying, but it's also the reality of what you all experience and what your team members experience whenever they learn something new. This is what it is. It's ugly, it sounds terrible, or it might look terrible. You might not get results as fast as you think, okay? But that's the reality of the situation, and I don't just want to say that, I want you to see it and hear it and really understand what that feels like, just in case you don't remember, or if you've never had any ugly moments, I want you to know what this is. And then I demonstrate the flow, and we'll discuss what that is and how that's different. So, Anne-Marie, have we chosen how I'm going to torture myself? All right. All right, so I will be going to the slide I have dubbed Mozart 2. And if you look, I will be learning lines 31, starting at 31 and going to the end of 35. So the reason I placed that there was so that way I could have sort of a reference point, and so that way you could have a reference point for what I'm doing. I almost got a GoPro so you could see the music and my marking as I was over the shoulder, and I was like, $400. That's some diciness right there, at least for now. All right, so first things first. For those of you who were not in here while I was warming up, I want you to know that I actually can play the violin, and I want you to know what good sounds like, because to me, this thing that's happening or about to happen is not good. it's going to hurt my feelings and my soul in ways that I cannot communicate to you right now, but when I watch the video, I will be cringing. There will be ice cream involved. I am just putting it out there. So I'm just going to play the beginning of the Mozart third violin concerto so you can hear, oh, wait, she knows how to play the violin. It's a thing, you know. Okay, so violin happens. Prepare to be disappointed, but that's half the point of this, right? Your disappointment. And my disappointment for your learning gain. So I'm going to take a look, and I'm starting with 31, and the first thing that I'm doing is I'm doing some strategy learning, right? So I'm like, how am I going to do this? Because it looks a little bit daunting. My fingers are freezing in this room, which is not particularly helpful for a violinist, and also I'm a little anxious, which causes my fingers to be like cold rubber, disgusting. So also not helpful. So these are the conditions under which I am learning. Fantastic. But I'm taking a look, and I'm noticing right away, I know I'm in the key of D, so that is the little hashtags at the beginning of the line. Those in music land are called sharp signs, and that gives you information about what note to play. So I'm taking a look, and I'm assuming I'm in third position, so I'm actually just making some markings on the music. TSA loved the tabletop stand, by the way. So I'm just making some markings in measure 31 to tell me, okay, we'll try this out. This is erasable pen, which is like my best friend in this situation. And then I'm making some beat markings for the little, Anne-Marie really chose a tough section. Good for you. She wanted me to take up 20 minutes, full minutes, and it's gonna happen. So I'm gonna take it as slowly as I can. I have a tendency to talk fast. I have a tendency to play fast initially. Bad, but that's what I do. So I have to be intentional, knowing these are my weak spots. Try to attend to the fact that I rush. I always have. So here goes. Let's. Okay, all over the place. C sharp wasn't quite. So what I'm listening to right now, I'm not listening to like the musical beauty of this. That is not going to happen in 20 minutes. What I am listening for are the notes and the rhythms and the intonation. So, you know, I noticed that my intonation. So I just wanted to double check. I was like, wow, that's out of tune. What can I do to self-correct? So I'm self-correcting by double checking. Okay, so this should basically be a scale. I'm sort of stepping down. There's some repetition I notice in patterns. So again, much like testing, right? Pattern matching, looking for those kind of basic things throughout the software, not different, just with music. So I'm going to keep trying this section. I don't want to go on to the next part. So I just want to do measure 31. That's the one with the 31. And then there's like a line. It's called a bar line. And then the next group of 8 notes after it is the next measure. That's measure 32. So that's where I'm going to focus my attention right now. Okay. 1, 2, 2. Okay, so intonation is good. I'm going to actually make one more marking for the shift, and I'm going to try to go a little bit faster, but I am having I'm having a little bit of trouble getting that shift to be just the way I want it to, and so I have to make sure that I'm attending to the fact that I'm not skipping over it, which is super duper tempting because I'm in front of all of you and on camera, but attending to okay, what are the problems, the shift? What do I want to do, make sure I'm in tune? What else do I want to do, make sure that I am staying on a steady rhythm, rhythmically steady and rhythmically accurate. Okay, so I just added that little end of the line. Okay, that's in tune. That's good. So, and I'm Allegro, so that's fast. So there's a marking on the top of the page, which you can't see, and that just says Allegro, which is that the tempo should be at a quick clip. So I want to see if now I can get, so there's a measure at the very end of the line where I was playing all those eighth notes, which are, they all kind of look the same, and they all have little dots, either underneath or above them. So 31, 32, 33, 34 is where it dun, dun, da, 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 da. So you've got these little, like the teeny notes, if you can see them, like teenier than the other teeny notes, like they're more tiny. The more tiny notes is where I am now, because I'm trying to figure out, okay, so I see more tiny notes, that's fantastic, but how am I gonna play them? So much like any other discipline, there are clues, there are hints, and you have a toolbox, right? You don't just have one method that you're going to use to do something. I have a couple of different options here. So the question I need to figure out is what option is going to work best for this particular situation. And since it is the first time doing it, I legitimately don't know. So I'm going to try some things, and some of them are going to sound absolutely horrible. I apologize for this in advance. And apparently I'm going to rip off the mic. Okay, so first I want to try it, keep trying it in. Yeah, see, but I can't, so I'm trying it in first position, but I can't get that grace note in there in first position, and that's making me freak out a little bit. But if I do it in second position, I could do it in second position, but how am I going to get there? So there's positions on the violin. This is part of my toolbox, is being able to get around the instrument. A lot like Google Maps. There's 17 ways to go, but some have traffic. So I'm basically making some choices about how I'm going to get to the places I'm going. And I also know that I'm not as good in second position as I am in first and third. I'm not as comfortable. I don't love it. So, but I'm going to try it anyway, because I think it's the right answer. But I'm not sure how I get there. Oh, wait a minute, though. So now I have to think about combining things. Think of this like integration testing. I have a unit. I have the measure as a unit before. I have to make them work. I have to make sure they work together, because I can make a decision about the last measure. This is very easy, because I want to play it in first position. But the measure before is going to dictate how I actually do the last measure. Not dissimilar to testing, where, okay, well, this unit works and that unit works, but do they work together the way you think they work? Don't know. So here I am in hell, which I brought upon myself. I understand this fully. Oh. Oh! Okay, so I figured it out. So in the measure before, if I shift to second position, actually 2 measures before, then I'm setting myself up so each unit works to get me to the final place where I need to be. So it's never just about a single note or a single rhythm. It's always, there's a lot of setup, another familiar word in the world of coding, testing, software, and pretty much anything else that you do with intention. So setting up, open, 2, 1, shift back to 1 on the F sharp. Oh my God, that's so good. I love it when things work. Okay. So now let me try integrating this line. So I'm playing the line that starts with a 31, and I'm going all the way to the end of that line. And each sound you hear is equivalent to 1 dot. If that helps you to follow, if you're not a music reader, you can follow the dots. Yes, okay. Acceptable for the time being. So what am I looking at in terms of time? Okay, 7 minutes. Ting. Jessica throws invisible pen at Paul. Okay, so I want to try to add, now that I went through all the trouble of making this into second position, I want to try to add the tiny notes, which I still did not add yet. Okay. I actually kind of can't get my fingers to move fast enough because they're really cold. But, known risks, right? So if I were in a performance situation, and this is kind of a musical thing, I would not put that in the performance, right? I would know better. And I would know that that's something I could eliminate before I went into production. So, hey, listen, you can choose in music. Yes, exact. Thank you, Paul. I'm limiting my scope. So I do want to try at least measure 35, because measure 35, it does have some more of those evil, the tiny notes, they're called grace notes. It has some more of those evil grace notes, but it also has a neat, and by neat I mean evil, but also neat shift from second position to, I'm thinking I'm going to do third position and then a fast run. Like a 16th note run. So I kind of just want to first try that 16th note. Well, that's not nice, Mozart. Why? Hashtag no. Yeah, I don't, Let me just get it in tune first. So the thing that's happening now is, as I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking, okay, that sounds terrible, but what does terrible mean, right? So that was a judgment of the quality of my playing. If I asked anybody here who was a non-violinist to come up and play, you'd be like, no, it was fine. Thanks, right? So terrible is a judgment word. In order to have quality, I do believe that we have to be able to articulate what it is that we are looking for. What are the conditions of terrible, right? So for me, the condition of terrible is that it's not in tune, I'm unable to play it at rhythm, and I'm unable to play it quickly or slowly. I don't know really how to make that happen. So now I've articulated the conditions of terrible. Awesome. How am I going to fix it, right? How am I going to get this from terrible to less terrible? Because my my goals are really small right now, limited scope, limited time. So the one thing I do want to do is bring this down to less terrible. So I'm going to play it in first position just so I can hear it in tune, so I can train my ear for what it needs to do. That's really strange. Just the D sharp, there's some strange stuff in there. I don't really know how to relate the strange stuff, like the sharps, but it's just a strange musical progression. Okay, so now, I can play it, but now it's a question again of I was in. And how do I? Oh, I could just shift back. It's not having page objects in your Selenium code, but Sometimes you just gotta make it work. So I am actually going to shift back. And now, none of this is concrete. The beauty of everything that we do in life is that very little is cemented in stone. Whether it's a production system, whether it's a musical performance, the markings I made on the page, artists have it rough, man. They do. You paint, it dries, you know. But most situations don't put us in that area. So it's kind of nice because I'm making these decisions now in front of you, but I can come back to this and I can say, you know what, I don't love how that's working. Refactor the fingerings and be on my merry way. Now, musicians don't use the word refactor, but it is what I'm doing. So, you know, I know that we are a community where language is an oft contested word, and I'm not going to bring anything into a space of contention except to say that it is important to know it and to know who you're communicating with and how you could better communicate with whoever you're communicating with. And I do think that context changes that, right? So notice I didn't say I'm going to redo, I said refactor my fingerings because you all know what that means. So I am going to put this on hold for the moment. That's all of the possible choices. And since there's only a minute, I want to just thank CAST and the organizers for having me here to speak. I'd love to thank all of you for your attention. You know, throughout the talk, I've been able to make eye contact with many of you while I've been talking, which is always really great to be able to engage with the audience. And I'd love to hear any questions or thoughts that you have about this. Thanks so much. Oh, I did forget the flow part, so. There.
All right, better? Okay. So, green cards, new questions. Yellow cards, same thread. Red cards, what I have to say is more important than anything else we're talking about right now. Usually that would be a clarifying question or an acronym, something like that. All right, looks like I have 2, 3. All right, so we'll start with 61 in the back, and then we have 76, and
does this work? Hey, Jess, that was awesome.
Hey, thanks.
So my question is kind of two pieces. Number one, I assume you did your 10,000 hours to get good at violin.
More or less.
Do you believe that we need to do the same thing with testing, or do you think you've ever met anyone who has done that same amount of work in testing?
You know, that's a really good question, and I think the answer is everybody's favorite answer, it depends. And the reason I say it depends is because, like, so I haven't done 10,000 hours in testing, but ostensibly I have a reasonably good position. I am speaking at conferences and stuff like that, and I think that the reason that that happened is because I've been able to connect to these 10,000 hours of skills that I have in music, actually. So I think it depends. If you've been a career tester, you're going to build up. And if you're, and there's another thing. There are lots of people who've played violin as long as I have that may not play as well. There are people who've played for less time that have played significantly, substantially better. There are 12-year-olds who could kick my ass. And that's because they are putting in that time early and in a very concentrated way, and they don't have like bills to pay or anything. Their parents are like, go practice, and they're like, okay. You know, and then they are playing the Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto at 12, like Josh Bell. So, you know, I think that it's more important to if you're looking at sort of that expertise perspective, it's really important to abstract up and say, okay, and where have I developed all these expertise points? Or if you're looking from a team perspective, where has my team developed these expertise points in their life, and how can I help them hone in on skills that they already have? So, you know, and in terms of testing, if you have a tester on your team, or if, you know, not anybody in this room, of course, but there are testers who, you know, they don't even know that conferences exist. They don't know testing's a discipline. Somebody was like, hey, I need you to do this thing. Can you check it? And they're like, all right. You know, so they can spend 10,000 hours running regressions line by line. And I would argue that that 10,000 hours is not as valuable in terms of developing a testing mindset than my 10,000 hours in music plus 7 years of testing experience. So, you know, that's a layered and complex question, but that's kind of my take on it.
Okay, so next is 76.
This might be unfair,
Uh-huh.
and feel free to not do it, but I'd like to hear the final attempt, because you made some choices,
Oh, yeah.
and then we ran out of time before you got to do the final attempt, so.
Sure. I mean, I think you will guess that it may not be perfect or even good after 20 minutes, but again, that's, my goals were to have the notes in tune and have the rhythm. So if I've accomplished that much or made some progress, that will be okay. So there we are. Not unfair. That is completely fair. That's within bounds.
I just want to say I'm very disappointed that you didn't get the testing on those 2 bars done right on time, on schedule,
Yep.
within cost and budget. So I think that really, you know, diminishes your performance appraisal
Yeah.
here today.
It does. I mean, you know, that's assuming that you believe that all 3 sides of the iron triangle can be satisfied, and I do not hold that same belief, so we're good.
No, I really appreciate it. I am a rather analytical person and an engineer. However, I've also done some teaching. And one of the common themes here, which I think is amazing, is in something that sounds so technical, software testing, you hear art a lot and you hear creativity a lot. So it's really one of the few disciplines where I hear that kind of blending of specific knowledge and technology and creativity, which to me is amazing. I have a long career in engineering, but I've been software testing for about 10 years, and I can tell you it's real. My creative side comes out, you know, along with my nerdiness. So thank you for blending those things all together.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, that's literally why I fell in love with it the very first day I did it. I couldn't believe it was a job. I was like, people get paid for this? What? Like, I found it. Shangri-La. Like, so happy.
Thanks, Jess. And I'm sorry for picking a really hard piece.
No, it's great. It's perfect.
My question it's in relation to, I've been reading a bit in background about this guy called Tim Galloway, and he wrote a book called The Inner Game of Testing. And he talks about having 2 minds when you're learning something. You've got your inner mind, that's basically your ego, that's judging. like you've done a crap job, you're bad, how can you be so terrible, and blah, 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 and that's awful, versus your external game, which is the playing the violin, right? And I was just wondering, from a learning perspective, how that applies into some of the things. Is that something that you've sort of been looking at in your applied learning and your background as a teacher and things like that?
So it's interesting that you mention, back in 2002, 2001, I went to Indiana University to study violin teaching for 2 weeks with Mimi Zweig, and she was Josh Bell's teacher, and one of the books that was recommended was The Inner Game of Music. And so there was it had similar core themes, very similar core themes, and I do, what I've noticed in my own self, and in my students, but also in my own self, is that there's a place for judgment. And I think the place for judgment comes when it's like, okay, it's not what I expect. This is not the expected outcome, right? Like, so we have the actual outcome. Jessica played that measure like it. We have the expected outcome. We'd like it to sound like Mozart when a professional plays it. And those judgments can be useful because it helps the learner, me in this instance, to get to the place where I'd like to be. I think that the kind of judgments that are harmful are the ones where it's like, I'm crap. This is crap. I can't test. I can't code. I can't. Because it's not based on any observable outcome. It's based on an internal belief system that may or may not be accurate based upon a person's history. And I say this as somebody who, up until 2 or 3 years ago, I told myself regularly how bad I was at pick anything because I was bad at it all. So I have this personal history in place, and it's unsurprising to see that many of our students do. And we have team members, they're human beings. So they will also come into the workspace and have these kind of feelings, and taking that time to point out not only my own learning, like, okay, but what is it that I'm wanting to accomplish? Because saying I'm shit doesn't get me any further to the goal. It's misplaced bad feelings that don't push me forward. Instead, I try to say, okay, but what is it that I want? And to my team also, what would you like? What are your concerns? What is the help that you need to push forward? So that factors hugely into, that kind of thinking factors hugely into how I approach not only my own learning, but also coaching and teaching on my team.